So in this video we will see about chapter 2 unit 3, which is about essential elements of valid contract. Now what are the essential elements of valid contract? First is that the party should be competent to enter into contract. Now what do you mean by capacity of parties? It means that the person should have attained the age of majority, that is more than or equal to 18 years. The person should be of sound mind, that is they should understand the consequences of entering into contract and should not be disqualified. And there has to be free consent. So number 1 is parties must be competent to enter into contract. So number 2 is there has to be free consent. Free consent means consent which is not caused due to coercion, undue influence, fraud or misrepresentation or mistake. Now coercion means if a person forces or threatens or pressurizes another person to enter into a contract, then it's caused by coercion. In that case it's not a valid contract. And it should not be caused by undue influence. Undue influence means a person by his authority or responsibility or by a position of influence should not cause the other party to give consent without that person giving the consent voluntarily. And it should not be caused by fraud. Fraud means if a person intentionally deceives or cheats another person by false facts, then it's a fraud. It should not be caused by fraud or misrepresentation. Misrepresentation meaning it should not be caused due to false facts. That is, consent should not be obtained by giving false facts. And it should not be caused by mistake. Mistake means an error. So number 1 is competency of parties. Number 2 is free consent, and they will have to be a lawful consideration and lawful object. So lawful consideration means consideration should be accepted by law. It should not be one which is prohibited or forbidden by law. And they will have to be lawful object. So lawful object means the object will have to be lawful, that is, it should not be prohibited by law. Example of unlawful consideration is drugs. If at all a person is agreeing into a contract to sell a particular product, or maybe a house or car, let's take for example, in exchange for drugs, then it's an unlawful consideration. And lawful object means, for example, for purchase or sale of car, if we are entering into a contract, then that's a valid contract. If at all a person enters into a contract to murder some other person, then it's an unlawful object. The purpose or object for which they are entering into a contract is unlawful or is prohibited or forbidden by law. And it should not be expressly declared to be void. And there are certain contracts which are expressly declared to be void. That shouldn't be the case if it has to be a valid contract. Capacity to contract. Capacity to contract means the person entering into contract should be competent to enter into contract. That is, competency of parties involved. So capacity to contract means legal ability of parties to enter into contract. That is, they should be competent to enter into contract. Now what do you mean by competency? 3 main things have to be checked over here. 1 is they should have attained the age of majority, that is more than or equal to 18 years in India, and should be of sound mind. Sound mind means at the time of entering into contract, they should understand the terms of the contract. They should understand the consequences of entering into contract. And they should not be disqualified by law. In certain cases, persons may be disqualified from entering into contract. No, such should not be the case. First is competency of parties. Competency of parties means parties will have to be of sound mind, should have attained the age of majority, and should not have been disqualified. Now what if we enter into minor? So void agreements. Generally, the contracts that we enter into with minors are void ab initio. That is, it is void since the very beginning, from the initial stage. No ratification. Generally, we will not be able to ratify or approve the contracts or agreements that we have entered with a minor. And beneficiary rights. So minor will not be able to, take for example, if we have extended the loan to minor and minor has mortgaged his property. Now in that case, if at all minor has not paid the amount, we will not be able to enforce the rights against him. That is, we will not be able to sell off his property and settle a loan from the same. But minor can enforce beneficiary rights against us. Let's take for example, in this case, if it's vice versa, wherein we have mortgaged a property with minor and we have borrowed a loan from minor. Now in that case, if at all we do not pay the loan amount, then obviously minor can enforce the rights against us. Pleading minority. Minor usually can plead their minority in certain legal matters. Take for example, a minor has borrowed a loan by misrepresenting his or her age. Later on, if at all the minor does not pay, they will not be held liable for repayment of loan. Since they can plead their minority, stating that they are minor and that they are not liable or bound by the terms of contract agreement. Liability for necessaries. Now, however, if at all minor has entered into any contract with us, so maybe if we have provided for necessaries to them, then in that case they will be liable, but only to the extent of their property. Say for example, a minor buys a laptop on credit, the shopkeeper can recover only what the minor can afford, that is from the minor's property and not beyond that. Contract by guardians. In certain cases, contract are made by guardian for minor, that is enforceable if they benefit the minor. If they do not benefit the minor, then that is not enforceable. No specific performance. Agreement with minors cannot be specifically enforced against them. Let's say for example, if they are to perform something under the contract, minors will not be asked to perform those. No insolvency. So generally a minor cannot be declared insolvent due to their incapacity to contract. Partnership. So can minors be admitted into partnership form? Yes, minors can be or cannot be. Minors cannot be admitted as partner into partnership form, but definitely they can also share benefits from consent with the consent of all the adult partners. Generally, a minor cannot be admitted as a partner in a partnership firm, but they can be allowed to share the benefits within the firm, provided all other partners within the firm agree. Agency. So minor can act as agents but are not liable for actions taken on behalf of principal. They can act as agent. They can do certain acts on behalf of principal, but they are not bound or liable since they are incompetent parties to contract. Parental liability. Parents are not liable for contracts entered into by minors unless they are acting as their agent. So if at all parents are acting as agent for minors, then in that case they are liable. Otherwise they are not liable. Joint contracts. So if at all there is any joint contract with minor, only adult is liable in that case. Surety for minor. An adult who is guaranteeing minor's debt is liable if the minor defaults. If at all any person is acting as surety for a minor wherein the surety is an adult, then surety will be held liable if at all the minor does not pay that amount. Minor or shareholder. If at all minor is a shareholder, they can be a shareholder only through guardian, but they cannot directly be shareholders. Liability for tort. Tort means civil wrong. So minor can be held liable for torts unless it's from breach of contract. If it's due to breach of contract, then they will not be held liable. An aspect and example is given. So for void agreements, a minor who mortgaged his house cannot be held liable for repayment. But if at all we have mortgaged something and we have borrowed loan from minor, then since in that case minor has beneficiary interests or rights, so he can enforce that against us. But if at all we have lent a loan and then we have got some property as mortgage from the minor, we will not be able to execute those rights against that minor. No ratification. Generally, a minor's promissory note cannot be ratified even when they attain majority. So, if at all we have entered into any contract with minor, let's take for example when the minor was 15 years of age, and if minor has attained 18 years of age, still we will not be able to ratify that contract as valid. Still, that contract would be invalid only. Beneficiary rights. A minor can definitely enforce a mortgage executed in their favor. So basically, if minor has got any beneficiary rights, they will be able to enforce the same. Pleading minority. In certain cases, if we have entered into contract with minor, they can plead their minority since they are incompetent parties to contract. Liability for necessaries. Minor buys a laptop on credit, then recovery is limited to what we can recover from their property. Contract by guardians. A guardian can validly contract for a minor if it benefits them. No specific performance. Agreement with minors cannot be specifically enforced. There are certain agreements that we can enforce, but contract with minors cannot be enforced. No insolvency. So minors generally cannot be declared to be insolvent due to their incapacity to contract. Partnership. So minor cannot be a partner but can benefit from partnership with consent. Agency. A minor cannot act as an agent but is not liable for actions taken. Minor can act as an agent but is not liable for actions taken. Basically, a minor can do certain things on behalf of other person as principal. He can act as an agent for the principal, but still he will not be liable for the actions taken. Parental liability. Parents are generally not liable for minor. If at all they are acting as agent for minor, then in that case only they are liable. Joint contract. In case of joint contract, if there are adults as well as minors, in that case only adults are liable and minors are not liable. Surety for minor. An adult who guarantees minor's loan is liable if the minor defaults. If at all a person is acting as surety for minor, in that case surety. If surety is adult, then in that case if minor defaults, obviously the surety is liable. The person who gives a guarantee. Take for example, minor is borrowing a loan for which an adult major is acting as a surety. Now in that case, if minor defaults, then in that case obviously surety will become liable. Minor shareholder. Minor can generally not be a shareholder in a company, but on behalf of guardian, he can be a shareholder. Liability for torts. So they are liable for civil wrong unless it's breach of contract. For breach of contract, they are generally not liable.